Hey you guys, it's Claudia Beleza, the fashionista, and today we're going to be talking about the French seam. Now this is a seam that you typically use with sheared fabric, which I have right here. This is a crepe fabric, and you'll find it in like lingerie or maybe a delicate blouse or something like that. So typically you have a 1/2 inch seam allowance for this seam. It's a seam that also has a finished edge, and you don't have to worry about like raw edges. So as you see, this is the top of the fabric, and that's the right side, the outside of the garment, and this is the wrong side of the garment. And it conceals, there's 2 stitches, a stitch within a stitch. So it conceals the raw edges and you have a clean finish, or you get like a 2-for-1 deal. Okay, so you should have looked at the plain seam video that I did. If you have not, I suggest you go check that out. It's a quick introduction on what you need to do and making sure that you get the best seam. But if you have, let's go on, and there's going to be a difference here when we're doing the French seam. Now, when we do the French seam, what we do is we sandwich the wrong sides together. So pretend this is the right side and it's up. And I place that on top of the fabric that's already laying down. Now the right side for the one that's laying down is facing the table. The wrong side is what's facing up. So we're going to put the wrong sides together, and that's how we start off this is how we start off doing the French seam. Okay, so with the wrong sides of my fabric facing each other, I am going to go ahead and stitch a line or a seam with a seam allowance of 1/4 of an inch. That is just half of the seam allowance that I have for this fabric or garment that I'm making. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch my first seam after I put my presser foot down. And I'm going to do my reverse stitch. This is a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance I have right here. Oh. Now I'm going to cut down that 1/4 of an inch into an 1/8 of an inch. So just go down the middle of my seam allowance and cut that down. And now I'm going to press that seam allowance open. So I'm going to get my pressing cloth, since I have a synthetic fiber material. And it's sheer, so I don't want my iron directly on my fabric. Get some of that laid out and steamed out. And now I'm going to open my seam allowance. Okay, so you see there, the seam allowance is pressed opened. So the seam allowance is sandwiched inside. I'm going to line up my piece of fabric at the mark for a 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to sew my my seam. so there we have it. We have our French seam. This is the wrong side of our garment. If you see the seam right here, that's the wrong side. Or should I say the stitch line? If you see the stitch line, that's the wrong side. And this is the right side of the fabric. And there we have it. We have a beautiful seam that is great for your sheer fabrics. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up and share. And stay tuned for my next video. I'm going to be talking about some more stitches that you can do for your sewing.